So two main ways we have of dealing with data in React: state and props. We've done state, we haven't really done props. So let's just add a second component. Not that big a deal. Ordinarily, you'd put them in separate files, but you don't actually have to. Let's just make another component up here. Because here's the thing. We've got these, each acrobat being printed here. It kind of feels like each individual acrobat in the list should be its own component. So let's do that. When you're thinking about the thing you want to build, you sort of break it down into where possible components could be. And we've got 4 of these things, and they keep replicating and so on. There's one for each piece of data. It kind of feels like that's a perfect opportunity to make a reusable component. Just reuse the same component for each one. So let's make one. Let's make a component called Acrobat. So we make a class called Acrobat, and it inherits from or extends React.component. Every component that is a class needs a render method, and each render method is going to return some JSX. In this case, all I really need it to return is that li. Now, the Acrobat. Right now I'm going to have a problem because Acrobat's not defined inside this component. And that Acrobat data is going to come from outside this component, right? This little tiny component isn't maintaining the list of Acrobats. That's happening in app. This component is just responsible for printing whatever Acrobat was passed in. So it's like a function that needs some data from the outside. If this were a function, we would pass it in as an argument, right? Anytime that's the case, you instead pass it in as a prop. So props are like the arguments of components. Any data that comes from the outside needs to come in through a prop. And we get to our props through this dot props. So this dot props dot acrobat init dot name, this dot props dot acrobat dot feet. So I have a prop named Acrobat now, or we're assuming that we have a prop named Acrobat. So down here, where before we had the LIs, all we're going to have is an Acrobat tag. Self-closing tag, it has no children. And that will just use the component that we made. But that component expected a prop, right? And props look just like HTML attributes when you pass them in. So whereas you put arguments inside parentheses when you call a method, when you call a component and you need to pass in some props, they look like HTML attributes. So I'll just say Acrobat equal, and again, it's not a string, so I need curly braces, and I want this Acrobat right here. Now that's the word Acrobat an awful lot of times on one line. So if I wanted to, I could change the name of my variable here. How about this? Current Acrobat. Just to make the point. So this is just the variable that's coming into map, right? And that's the value of my prop, but the name of the prop is Acrobat, and that's important because that's how I refer to it up here. This dot props dot acrobat. So this is the actual name of the prop. This is the value, which could be anything. We could put an object right in there, and it would do the same thing. So that's how we do it. So props can have, if props are strings, you can just use quotes and put the string right in there. But if it's any other kind of value, you have to do it as a JavaScript expression and thus have to use curly braces. If it's a number, if it's a Boolean, if it's anything other than a string, anything other than a string literal, you got to use curly braces. So this should work exactly the same. I saved it and I still see it working the same way. So we just broke it up into more components. So now we've got a very, very simple component here. It's easy to test, it's easy to understand, and we just use it where we want. So that keeps our other component a little simpler too. Yeah. Yes, but we haven't learned about that yet. Yes. For right now, as far as we're concerned, although we've kind of hinted that you don't always have to have classes for your components, we haven't learned about that trick yet. Has anybody else learned about that trick? Yeah? Was it in the documentation that you actually read last night? Really? Oh, I didn't even know that was in the tutorial. Cool.